Thank you so much, William, and welcome everybody. I'm excited to share with you the tale of an epic battle, a battle of all ages, Captivate versus Storyline. You have Coke versus Pepsi, you have the Packers versus the Bears, and you have Captivate versus Storyline. So if you go out there in the world, there are a lot of opinions. You'll have folks who will jump up and down on a table saying Captivate is the better choice, and folks who will jump up and down on the table saying Storyline is a better choice. I'm here to tell you that they're both great tools. There are some things that I like about one more than the other. There are some things that annoy me about one versus the other. And so my job is to navigate you through the pros and cons. My job is not to tell you which one is better for you, because only you can decide that. My job is to give you information to help make that decision. So I'm here to do a very quick deep dive. How can you do that quick and deep at the same time? Well, we're going to cover a lot. There's a link there in chat to the handout that will help you if you want to follow along or to refer to it later, the various things that we'll be going over. So let's jump in. I'm going to share my screen, so give me just a moment to set that up, and then also a moment to move the chat pod over. I will be monitoring chat while we're talking, so if you have any questions along the way, feel free to add them into the chat pod, and I will try to keep up. So when you look at things like Storyline versus Captivate, this is how a lot of people see it, like, oh, they're so different. Oh, you know, boy, you really got to be careful because there's such different tools. You got to make sure you have the right one. And yes, I agree you need to make the right choice, but I feel like it's more like this. These tools are way more alike than they are different. But those differences might be important to you, and that's why you need to know what they are. But what's the same? I mean, there's so much the same about you can add slides and images and audio and video and buttons and states and actions, variables, quizzes, the player, publishing. They both do all of that. And that's exactly what we're not going to talk about. We're not going to talk about the things that are the same. We're going to talk about what's different. And so here is a list, and this is what's reflected in your handout, of the different categories of information that we're going to talk about here. In your handout, you have anywhere between like 2 and 8 line items on each, and I'm going to go over a few in each of those. We won't necessarily cover every single one of them, but we'll go over the ones that I feel most strongly about. So let's jump in and we'll look at the first category, and that is the area of media. Now, I just said I'm not going to talk about where they're the same, and then this first line item, they're the same. But the reason I'm going to talk about it is because they only became the same about a month ago. So for quite a while, a lot of people who liked Captivate, one of the things they really liked was this concept of having a library. The library has all the audio, images, and video in a course, and you can manage those assets here. You have round-trip editing to things like Photoshop or Storyline, Photoshop or Snagit or Audacity or whatever you use. So it's really a great way to manage all of the assets in your course. And so a lot of people cited that as a big advantage to Captivate, especially those who come from a multimedia background. Well, if you are on the Storyline 360 subscription and you've updated since last January, or just a couple weeks ago, January 22nd, you now also have a media library with many of the same features. They're not an exact match, but they're awfully close. So here are all of your images, all of your audio, all of your video. You can do round-trip editing with the various, whatever applications it happens to find on your hard drive. So both of those tools now have the ability to work with a media library, so that's handy. Now, let me share with you an area where Captivate has a very distinct advantage, and it has to do with some of the leading technology, and that is the concept of 360 video or 360 images. So here's an example of a 360 image that comes automatically with Captivate. You actually get this image when you install the software. And so just as I'm doing here in the authoring environment, the student could also do a tour of the image and look at the ceiling, look at the floor, and then Captivate lets you make it interactive. So you can add these little buttons, and then those buttons can have triggers. And those triggers here, I'm displaying an image, or I'm displaying a text box. Or I can, launch a quiz question. So this is a great new tool. Storyline does not have the ability to to add and interact with a 360 image or video. What you can do in Storyline is if you have a 360 image online or something, you can embed it as a web object, but you can't then use the Storyline features to interact with it. So you can include it, but not do this kind of stuff where one of these, here I think it's this one over here, launches to a quiz question on the next page. That's the type of stuff that you cannot do in Storyline. Now, the other thing, I just want to pause for a moment. William, it looks like we're getting some comments about folks not being able to hear. Are you able to hear me?
I am, and I am working on that right now.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay, so another thing to take this even to the next level is you can add these to any course. Of course, so if I'm the student, I just look at it at my desktop, and I do all of this with my mouse. And if I'm on my tablet or my phone, I would use my finger to swipe around. However, if you create this as a specifically virtual reality project, then you also have the ability to convert it so that the students can view it in a virtual reality headset. They could take, for example, their phone and put it in something like Google Cardboard or something like that, and they can use it and they can navigate it with their heads, with their eyes. And so here's an example of what that might look like. This is just a simple 360 image I took of a hotel room about leaving things in a hotel. And so this is what it would look like if you were the user and you had your phone in a headset. Now, you wouldn't see the double images. You have one for each eye. So if this was on your head, it wouldn't look like two images. It would look like one. And then I'll play this video. As you physically move your head around, you see how it moves the image around. And there's that little dot. And you see if the dot stays on something long enough for the green circle to appear, then it clicks that button. But you're not clicking with your hands or with a mouse. You're doing it with your eyeballs, with where your head is. So you see how as long as you stay on it long enough for the green, then it moves, then it activates that button, whatever that button is supposed to be doing. In this case, it's going to bring up a menu. So you have the ability to do, this kind of virtual reality. So again, either just here on your computer or if it's a virtual reality project. Now, because the virtual reality projects are brand new to Captivate, if you want that where they can put it in a headset, you have a limited feature set. Like you can only do virtual reality slides. You can't put a regular slide in the middle of it. So you can't use every feature, but we see more of that probably coming in the future. So those are some areas where Captivate is really on the cutting edge of e-learning. I know virtual reality isn't cutting edge in the rest of the world. It's been around for a while, but it's new to a rapid development tool for us. But it also shows a global difference between Captivate and Storyline. Captivate, I feel, spends a lot of their time and attention on that cooler, cutting-edge stuff, 360 images and video, the fact that you can do geolocation. It does some of that really cool advanced stuff. But sometimes it struggles with what I call the Tuesday stuff. The stuff that we as an industry has been doing for 20 years, and they still have a really clunky process. And the perfect example of the next one is cropping. So let's say that I need to crop this image here because I want it to be square to match. So I have to go over here to Edit Image to bring up a dialog box where I then click Crop. And then I have to crop. I want to make it a little bit more square. But do you see how, since I'm doing it in a dialog box, how do I know I made it the right shape? How do I know I made it the right size? Well, I have to close it, do this, Shift, decide, oh, nope, I cropped too much. Okay, great. Let me go back, edit my image. Let me recrop. Oh, wait, I got to reset all. I've got to try again. It's just amazingly hard to crop. I mean, really? Whereas if I go to Storyline, and I've got the same slide here, and I want to crop it, I go to Format, I crop, I do this, and I can do it right on the slide. Right on the slide, I can decide right here if it's the right size. I hit crop again, and notice if I hit crop again, I still have my old stuff, so I can change my mind. That would be considered non-destructive editing. It's not getting rid of that extra stuff. So, yeah, isn't it awesome that Captivate can do 360 images and video? But isn't it awesome that in Storyline you can just crop right on your slide? So that's why, you really have to figure out what's important to you when you make your decisions. You can also do a lot more in terms of formatting of an image. So here on this image, if I just wanted to add a border, I can do that. I want to add a drop shadow. I can do that. Pretty simple standard stuff in the rest of the world, but in Captivate, I can't do that. I can do some things. For example, here in Storyline, if I go into Format Dialog Box, I can go in here and I can do some funky effects. Let me actually go to a different picture here. I'll go to this one here, Format Dialog Box, and I can do like brightness, contrast, transparency. Let's just do hard light and then blue. There we go, and it gives it a nice little effect here. I can do some of that in Captivate. So if I were to go back to Edit Image, you see I do have brightness, sharpness, contrast. It does have transparency, but it's called alpha. Alpha is a similar term, but it's kind of the opposite of transparency. So you can do some of the same things, but just, an outline and a drop shadow. That's Tuesday stuff. You need that all the time, and things like that are a little bit more challenging. Another thing that's different in terms of media would be how it handles PowerPoint slides. If you're importing PowerPoint slides, both of them allow you to do it, but they just approach it in a very different way. In Captivate, it's brought in like a movie. So this is a slide that had some animations where the logo just animates in. So it brings it in as a movie. Notice in my timeline, I can't just select the text. I can't just select this graphic. I can't change the animation. It brings it in like a movie, and I can play that movie. And it looks like it's being a little weird. I'm not sure if it's maybe it just didn't come in right at all, and now I have to go troubleshoot it. Or maybe if I preview it for real, it'll be fine. So it's a kind of thing of either it works or it doesn't. Either it looks good or it doesn't. And if I want to make a change, like maybe there was a title at the bottom that I wanted to change the text, I have to go back to PowerPoint and change it. Storyline takes a very different approach. Just philosophically is a different approach. Here, when I brought in that same slide, it broke it down into its component parts. So this is now a text box that I can edit. This is an image. It tries its best to keep the formatting, animations, and synchronizations, but I can change them. So when the items animate in on Captivate, that's the speed they animate here. But here, if I want to wait longer before the text pops up, or if I want to delete the text box, I can. You have more control over the slide. But when Storyline brings it in and breaks it down into component parts, maybe it doesn't do a good job. Maybe you get a stray line somewhere. Maybe one of the animations doesn't work. So there's going to be a little bit of cleanup in both. But I prefer the Storyline's approach because it means I can then make changes right here. Now, Captivate, you have to make the change in PowerPoint, bring it back in, but there's some round-trip editing that makes it not quite as clunky as it sounds. But I like the freedom and control that you get here. So those are some of the differences in the media category. So let's move on to the next category, and that is the area of mobile. And once again, they've got some philosophical differences on how they each choose to handle it. So both tools let you create content that works well on a mobile device, just inherently. You just put some slides in. Sure, you have to test it. You might have to tweak some things, but without doing much, you can do that on both. However, if you're trying to go to a phone, that can be really tricky because, things may not fit well on a phone. So here's an example of a responsive project in Captivate. This is a click to reveal activity where I have each of these three things and text box pops up. And can you see how they're in these squares? These are called fluid boxes. And if you set up a responsive project with fluid boxes, Captivate, forget which one we're on, Captivate will then reconfigure the arrangement and change the size of things differently to fit a device. So I'm going to run the responsive preview here. And you see how as the device gets smaller, the whole layout changed? Now, the preview isn't always a good tell of what it's going to look like for real. For example, you may have noticed that when I make it smaller, let's see if it'll let me do it. Here you go. You see how some of the text is weird? Well, maybe that's just the preview, or maybe that's a problem I have to now go through and troubleshoot. But there's a lot of things you could do here. Like you could say that if there were 2 text boxes, but on a phone, only show one of them. Or on a phone, can you make this appear in a pop-up window instead of using the screen real estate? So you can have a lot of flexibility to really make it work well on a phone. The challenge is that it's a lot of work to get there. I'll be super honest. It takes a while to get used to fluid boxes. I had to figure out how to structure these to make it look the way I wanted. So for example, these are nested. So you've got fluid boxes inside of fluid boxes. So I'd have to decide, so this here going across is one fluid box with 3 little boxes in it, and then another fluid box here with 3 in it. Or do I do, this is a fluid box with 2 in it, and this is a fluid box with 2 in it. Do I even need 2 fluid boxes, or can I put them in the same box? So it takes a while to figure this out. And then even once you have it figured out, it takes a while on any given slide to decide what works best, try it, no, that didn't work. I mean, you get better at that over time. So advantage, you can really have it optimized for the device. Disadvantage, a lot of work involved. Okay, Storyline takes a completely different approach. It instead says, we're not going to change the slide content, we'll change the player controls though. So let me preview this slide and I'll give you a sense of what that looks like. So let me start here on the computer. So let me turn off the audio. So here is the slide and it's a click to reveal and it works fine. And then here's my menu or navigation around the edge. But if I go to a tablet, the slide stays the same, but the player controls changed. So the player controls are responsive to the device type, but the slide just gets bigger or smaller. So if I go all the way down to the phone, it doesn't reconfigure in any way. So the upside is you don't have to do anything to make that happen. That's just automatic function. The downside, boy, that's not going to be a good experience for someone on the phone. So if you go this approach, you have to do what we call mobile-first design. When you design this slide from the get-go, you have to think about what would work on the phone. But then you only need one version of it because typically if it looks good on the phone, it's also going to look good on the computer. But the reverse is not true. If it looks good on the computer, it may not look good on the phone. So you have to decide which is more important to you. One takes more time, but it can really be optimized for the device, or you just say, no, I'm going to make it work on the phone, and it will scale up or down accordingly. Storyline will take care of the rest. So both involve design decisions. It's just whether it's about layout or whether it's about fluid boxes. So you decide which approach is right for you. And again, tablets aren't that hard. Tablets aren't that much smaller than a computer screen in terms of resolution. It's really if you want to go to phone that this becomes a really important distinction for you. And I hear a lot of people say, oh, I need it to work on a phone, therefore I need it to be responsive. Responsive is one way for it to work on the phone. Mobile first is another. Back in your handout here, the other thing that Captivate has is geolocation and accelerometer integration. So that's another example of, hey, they're going out there. They're going more into current and future technology than Storyline is, that you can set a variable that taps into where the student is if they have location services turned on. So you could say, hey, I can tell that if you're in New York, you get this content, but if you're in California, you get that content. That's really cool. I've never needed it, but it's cool. You have to know what you care about and what's going to matter for your design. So let's move on next to system simulations. So this would be if you want to record something on your desktop, like Microsoft Excel, or your time and attendance system. You want to teach on computer systems. Both tools do a really, really nice job. In fact, that's how Captivate started, is it just did that. Storyline does a good job as well also. They each have features I like over the other, so I'll share a little bit about that. One of the things that Storyline can do is it can take out, I'm going to jump a little bit out of order, I think. Here I have what I call a film strip view, or film strip approach, where it feels like a video to the learner, but it's really a series of independent screen captures, and we just animate the mouse over it so it feels like a movie, but it's not. Well, one of the things that Storyline does that's really nice is, let's see here, I'm about to click this button here. Let me zoom in. And what Storyline did is it pulled a representative screen capture for me. So while I was performing the procedure, it took all of these representative screen captures. So for example, what does this look like before I click the button? What does it look like after I click the button, right? Representative screen captures. But the problem is the representative screen capture here shows the hover state. And that's going to be confusing because my mouse is going to start out over here and the hover state is going to show before my mouse ever shows up. So I have spent I don't know how many hours in Captivate trying to use Photoshop or something to get rid of this effect. Or maybe you're hovered over something and you know what a tooltip is, like see how player just appeared there, that little tooltip, or maybe the tooltip shows up and you don't want it to. So I've spent I don't know how many hours on a Captivate course in Photoshop trying to clean up those things. But in Storyline, it didn't take this screen capture when you did your recording. When you did your initial recording, it recorded it as a video. So let me go back here. I can go back and access that video here. No matter whether you want it to be a video, you want it to be a step-by-step demo, you want it to be a step-by-step practice, it always records it as a video. And what that means is it didn't just capture those representative screenshots. It captured everything. Then when you said, please pull it in as slides, it picked for you. But you say, but you picked the wrong one. Well, there's a little feature called Action Fine-Tuning where I can just say, can you go back a little bit and can you give me that screen capture instead of that screen capture? And boom, it just sticks it in for you. So if you've never felt the pain of having to Photoshop all that stuff out, you won't appreciate this. But trust me, it's awesome. The other thing that's really nice about the fact that it records the full video is that it records the full video and then you can bring it in any way you want. You can bring it in as a step-by-step. You can come back later bringing it in as a practice. You can bring it in later as a test. You can keep bringing it in. Because you have all of it there. In Captivate, you do have the ability to, oops, I just accidentally launched Camtasia. In Captivate, let me go to conditional formatting demo here. You do have the ability when you record to record it as a demo and a practice. Record it once, use it twice, but you have to make that decision at the beginning. Whereas with Storyline, you don't have to make that decision at the beginning. It records the video, you bring it in whenever you want, and make changes to what it chose to capture. With Captivate, you sometimes have to start all over again. Another thing I really like about Storyline is its zoom feature. So here I have a finished video here. And so especially on something like Excel, it gets big and you want to be able to zoom in so that stuff isn't so small. So you see how I can zoom in, and then I can pan over, and then in a minute it's going to pan out just a little bit. So it has a really nice zoom and pan feature, very similar to what Camtasia has. Captivate has a zoom feature, but the images become so pixelated that they're worthless. Like if you zoom something just a little bit, you can barely see it. It really accomplishes nothing. I've gotten to where I just never use their zoom feature. However, they do have something nice if you wanted to go responsive. If you're going to do a responsive course, they have this nice feature. So let's say this is a good example of responsive versus mobile first. So what I just showed you here in Storyline is a good example of mobile first. If you were looking at this on a phone and it got really small, well, that might be hard to read. But for everybody, whether you're on a phone or not, we zoomed in. So if you looked at this on a phone, it would be fine. Mobile first. One design works for everybody. If you're doing responsive in Captivate, so now I'm switching over to Captivate. Let me refresh this. Here we go. If I'm on a big screen, I'm seeing the whole thing. That's great. And now I go over to, let me move it forward a little bit. So now I'm here, and that's great, but if I'm on a phone, what's going to happen is that there's no zooming, is it crops. So let me make this smaller. Do you see how it cropped? It cropped out all of those edges, and yet it didn't crop out what matters. It kept what matters. So you see how it's cropping, but it's keeping what I care about in the center. And it does that because on that slide, on that very slide, I told it the part to care about. It says you can crop everything else, but don't crop this. So you would go in on each slide and say, here, crop this, don't crop everything else. So they both have advantages and disadvantages around the cropping and the zooming. The other thing I like about the Captivate for systems training is how the audio is handled. For example, here is my script for this procedure. And so, you know, with systems training, you often have to split a sentence across multiple slides. So in Captivate, you can record all of it as one so that you have a nice cohesive sound and a good fluid rhythm. And then in Captivate, you just go add it to the first slide, and then there's a dialog box that comes up that lets you chop it up amongst them. In Storyline, you would have to go in and you would have to use probably external software would be the easiest. Take that, save it. Take that, save it. Take that, save it. Then put this one on slide 1 and this one on slide 2. So the process of adding audio is a little bit clunkier in Storyline when you're doing systems training. Okay, so that finishes up our next category, system simulation. So we're going to move on now to interactions, and we're going to do this in 2 categories. First, standard actions and triggers, and that's, again, what I call the Tuesday stuff, the stuff you're doing all day, every day, the stuff that's in probably 80–90% of your courses. But then we'll also look at the advanced actions, conditions, and variables that you're likely doing, but maybe not as often. Okay, so we'll start with the standard actions and triggers and take a look at that. So one thing that I really like about Storyline is that you can attach a trigger to just about anything. So I'll use the term trigger to mean something that causes some logic to run. So a trigger could mean show me a text box, play a video, jump to another slide, go to a URL, launch a document, add a point, grade a question. We call them triggers, which is what they're called in Storyline. They're called actions in Captivate, but I'll just use the triggers word for both just to keep it all straight in my head, if nothing else. So you can add triggers to just about anything. So here we have a click to reveal slide, and here's an image, and so I can just add a trigger to that image that says show this layer, and the layer has this hotel text that lives on a layer. We'll talk about layers in a minute. So if I want an image, if I want to click on 3 people, those 3 people can be my buttons, so to speak. However, in Captivate, let me go to that same slide. There we go, is I have to put something called a click box on top of it. So if I have an image, I can't just add an action to it. I can't add a trigger to it. I have to put something over it to be able to do that. So it just adds a little bit of extra work to get to the same end result. So the other thing that I like about Storyline is we'll go back to the same interaction. So let's say I do want this to show the layer hotel. What if I also want it to play a sound? Okay, well, I just add another trigger to say play a sound. Actually, I don't have a sound here, so I'm just going to make something up. I'm going to say change the state of something to something. I just made up a trigger. I just added 2 triggers to that button. Great. What do I do if I want 3? I just add another trigger. Okay, easy peasy. Just all one place, whether I want 1 trigger or 20 triggers, I do it in the same place. I'm going to delete that one. In Captivate, here's where I would add that trigger. So here I have my click box that's on top of my image, and over here on actions, I say that I want to show this text box. Great. So now I want to add a second trigger. You only give me 1 menu. I can only add 1 trigger from here. Now there's a way to add more triggers, but I have to go through a completely separate process. So I have to go, so let's say I already set this up. We go through first draft. I hear from my client. We want to do something else. I go, okay, I need 2 triggers. Ugh, that means I have to undo this and do it a different way. So I go to project, advanced actions, name this action hotel, I can't spell, hotel pop up, and I say I want to show whatever object. I'm just going to pick random things, and then I want to, let's say, pause something. Again, I'm just making stuff up. I can add 20 triggers here if I want. I save it, and then I go over here and I run it. So now I have to say, on success, execute the advanced action called hotel pop-up. So if you're doing really advanced stuff, we'll see in a minute that that dialog box is awesome. But if you just want to add 2 triggers to something, it's clunky. It's way easier to do. I find myself regularly going, okay, I've got my trigger. I have to make 2 triggers. That's annoying. Whereas in Storyline, you just say, oh, new trigger. Now, one thing that you can do in Captivate that you can't do in Storyline is say, like the show and hide I've been demonstrating. In Captivate, you can have a trigger on one slide that shows something on another slide. That's not something you can do automatically in Storyline. You have to set up variables to do it, so it's clunkier, but a little bit easier in Captivate. Now, here's another area where I think Storyline has an advantage, is I just showed you how we can run triggers based on clicking this image, and we saw the same thing in Captivate. Captivate only lets you run triggers through doing a certain thing. You have to click only its designated object types. So it has to be a click box or a button. There's only a few object types that can accept a trigger, or when the slide starts or ends, or when you answer a question in some cases. So there's a very finite set of when you can run these triggers. In Storyline, your when options are huge. The user can click something, just about anything, not just a button, not just a click box, just about anything, not quite everything, but a lot. Double click, right click, mouse hover, when the state of something changes, when an animation is done, when 2 objects intersect, or when something enters or leaves a slide. Sliders and dials we'll talk about in a minute. When a variable changes, when a video is done playing, when the timeline reaches 12.3 seconds. So there are way, way more opportunities to run logic in Storyline. So a lot of people say that Captivate is more powerful than Storyline because of some of that super advanced stuff, but I think that's really advanced. The fact that you can cause logic to happen in way more situations. So I feel like it lets us be more creative in some cases. Okay? So that's a couple of things. The other thing that I think is a lot easier in Storyline is a slide like this, a click to reveal activity. So in this particular case, let me hide what we have here. This is a click to reveal. The students click each of these, and it displays a piece of text. So you can do that in Captivate as well. So here we have a piece of text. And let me choose this one because I haven't messed with this one. So I would just say make it initially invisible by clicking this one here. And then on this click box, I say, show that text box. That was really easy to do. That was not hard at all. But what if I wanted to show a picture and this text box? That just means I now have to go to that separate process. Or what if I have to hide the others when I show one? See here, when I show one, I don't have to hide the others because they all fit. But what if there was a lot of information, like in this one? And when you show one, I want you to hide the others. Well, again, that means I have to go to the harder process, and it can be really tricky. Well, Storyline has something called layers. So if I want to reveal information, it's on a layer. And a layer is like a slide on top of a slide. And so right now, I just have a single text box. And sure, they all 3 fit. But I could put whatever I wanted on here. I could add another, I'll just add a little shape. I could add a picture. I could add another text box. I could take up more space. I could add audio. When they click on hotel, I can have any number of things coming up with just a single trigger. And it's pretty easy to manage because I can just look at and see what is on each one of these triggers. So click to reveal activities, in my opinion, are much easier to set up in Storyline. Storyline also has a nice input device called a slider and then also one called a dial. So let me show you what those look like. Here is a meeting cost calculator, where you use this slider to indicate, okay, how many people are in the meeting and how much money do they make per hour. Now in Captivate, I could do all of this math, and I could even make this get bigger and smaller, or go back and do the people around the table. They're called states. I can do states in Captivate as well. What I couldn't do is this slider as a way of input. So if I was doing this in Captivate, I would probably need plus and minus buttons, where they would just keep clicking plus to go up and then keep clicking minus to go down. So you lose that little bit of cool factor, and you probably need a little bit more logic to set it up. It would probably be a little bit more challenging to set up than a slider or a dial. So those are just nice input devices. So if you look at this standard actions and triggers, I think, except for this one, I think everything was Advantage Storyline. And it's because, again, Storyline, I think, is just better as the stuff you do every day. Now, when we get to the next category, which is the advanced actions and conditions, that's where it gets a little bit more even-keeled. So there are a few things that are better in Storyline. I'll cover those first, but then I'll talk about Captivate and how it has some really nice advanced features. Okay? So let's look at a couple of the things in Storyline that are different. When you set up a variable. You know what, let me back up just a little bit in case some of you aren't familiar with the concept of a variable. A variable is something that you use to keep track of something. I want to capture your name and then use it in a scenario later. I want to keep track of points along the way, or keep track of how much money you spent on your trip. So it's just a way to do a little bit of advanced logic. Both tools have them. In Storyline, you have the ability to do text and numbers. You can do text and numbers in Captivate as well. But Storyline also has a true-false variable, and sometimes that's real handy. There's nothing you can't do without it. It just sometimes it makes it a little bit easier. If you have something where there's only a yes or no value, it's like a light switch, sometimes it just makes it a little bit easier to set it up. The other thing that you have in Storyline that you don't have in Captivate is the ability to generate a random variable, which is really helpful with gamification. So, for example, here I have a game with state capitals. Let's see how we do. Great, let me go through the question. So basically for each question, it's worth whatever number of points you roll. So if you only roll 1s and 2s, you have to answer a lot more questions, whereas if you get 4s and 6s, you get, better. So, I only got 1 point. Oh, and it's Florida, that's where I grew up. I didn't even know this answer. Okay, but I only got 1 point. Then we'll go on, roll. What do I get? Oh, I got a 4. So it's generating a random number between 1 and 6 every time, and then showing the right dice based on that, and then adding it to my score. So in Captivate, you would have to use JavaScript if you wanted to generate a random variable, but in Storyline, you can do that. And just a note about this particular interaction and Storyline variables in general, we're putting together a self-paced Storyline course on how to use variables and conditions, and this is one of the activities you would learn how to build. So that's going to be coming out mid-spring. If you're on our blog, you'll get an announcement when that course is ready. I'm super excited about it. So those are some things that Storyline does that Captivate can't. But let's go back to that dialog box that annoyed me earlier. Remember this one? The advanced actions. Remember this dialog box? I find this dialog box annoying if I just want to add 2 triggers. But if I want really complex logic, this is a really powerful tool. So for example, in both Storyline and Captivate, you can do conditions. Like let's say you had to earn 7 points, or you took a quiz and you got 7 points, and you wanted to say, if you got 7 or more, show this message, but if you got less than 7, show that message. Or if you got 7 or more, play this sound, or jump to that slide. Otherwise, do this. Well, that's a little bit easier to set up here. I can say I want this action to be conditional, and I'll say if, so I'm just going to make stuff up here, if my variable here, let's say, is greater or equal to the literal value of 7, then I want you to go to the next slide. Now, I can absolutely set that up in Storyline. It's actually probably just a teeny bit easier to set that up in Storyline. Here's the difference. Now I want to set up a trigger for what happens if you don't get 7. Well, in Storyline, I'd have to add a new trigger that says go to slide 12 and add a condition to that. Here, I have this little else tab. Else means if this condition isn't met, do this instead. So go to the next slide if it's greater or equal to 7. Otherwise, I can say jump to slide number 12. So that way it's all in one. That would have to be 2 triggers in Storyline, each with its own condition. Here I can have 1 condition, 2 actions. The other thing is, what if I want it to play a sound and then go to the next slide? Well, I can add as many as I want here. Otherwise, go to that slide and play this other sound. I can do it all in one place, whereas that same thing would have been 4 triggers in Storyline. Then I can save all this. And the other thing is, what if I'm going to do something similar multiple times? I'm not going to save any of that. So here I have this activity where they decide whether they're going to do expensive parking or cheap parking. And then on the next slide, can you check a bag or not? And it runs them through this whole activity where it says, here's how much you spent, but here's how much is reimbursable. So here's how much you might have to pay out of pocket. So there's a fair amount of logic on each one of these. So when I set this first one up, I had to go to the fancy dialog box and go to Advanced Actions. And let's see if I can find it. Parking, this one, there we go. These are all the things that it has to do. Okay, that's a lot. Well, but what's interesting is it has to do the same basic things on this slide. Sure, it's going to show a different text box. Sure, it's going to add a different number, but it's going to do the same thing. So I can save this as what's called a shared action, and it's like creating a template. So when you have something that has 7 actions and you're going to be using it over and over again with a few twists, save it as a template, apply it to the new slide, and then just tweak the things you want to redo. Whereas in Storyline, you would have to copy and paste each of the 7 actions individually. So those are really nice features. So while this dialog box can be annoying if you just want 2 triggers, you can really set up some complex if, then, else logic. There are very few things that you can do here that you can't do in Storyline. It just takes a lot more thinking and a lot more troubleshooting sometimes if you're going super complex. So that's a lot of what's different in terms of the advanced actions, variables, and conditions. One other that I forgot to mention has to do with conditions and variables, and that is if I go here to Project Variables, I can set up my variables. So these are the ones I set up to keep track of those things, just like I can do in Storyline. But one thing that Captivate has that Storyline doesn't is it gives you access to all sorts of systems variables. So what is that? Well, let me zoom in a little bit so you can see this better. I mean, it looks a little scary at first, like CP command go, what? Well, a lot of these you would never use, but some of them would be really useful. So for example, the date. You have access to whatever date it is at the moment the student plays it. That can be cool in certain scenarios. In fact, we've got a scenario for that just right here in this course. So you go through this reimbursement scenario, and then at the end it shows you what your reimbursement amount is. So it captured your name, and it's going to show that back. It's going to show that. All of this I can do in Storyline as well. However, I can put the day's date, not the day I as the author made this, but the day you as the student are running it. So you have access to what are called system variables. So you have access to more information to either display back to the student or use as if-then logic. So that can be cool in certain situations. Okay, the next category is accessibility. So accessibility will be for individuals with disabilities where you want to make sure that people can use it with their assistive technology. And there's 3 main things, little things, but 3 main things that you want to care about. Let me go to this slide. One is called alt text. So if you're visually impaired, you're going to use a screen reader. And your screen reader, you can't see, so it's going to say, you decide, parking, total expenses. But what's it going to do when it gets to this picture? It can't interpret a picture. So you, as the author, would add what's called alt text so that you would tell the screen reader what to say about it. So that's one area, alt text. Another is tab order. So my screen reader is going to go through this in an order. Well, I wouldn't want it to get to the buttons before it went into the options, right? You know, you wouldn't want the submit button to come up before the question. You have to put things in a logical order. And then the third is closed captioning. So alt text, tab order, and closed captioning are the big three things you care about. In Storyline, it's more efficient to do both. So if I want to set alt text and tab order, I can do everything in one dialog box. So here is my picture. So, and actually I have to make sure, is that my picture? Yep. So here's my alt text. And if I needed alt text on this, I could add, I do it all in one place. I can also plan my alt text here, my tab order. So by clicking and dragging, I need to create a custom order. I can move this around and change the order all right here for the whole slide. So it makes it really efficient to manage. If I'm in Captivate and I want to tag individual items with alt text, I have to go to each item over here, accessibility, uncheck this, add it, and then go to the next one. So it's way more clicks. And then in terms of tab order, you can only adjust the tab order for interactive objects. Storyline lets you adjust the tab order for all objects. Now for closed captioning, it's a little bit more of a toss-up. They both have advantages and disadvantages. So let's say that I wanted to add closed captioning to this. I could go here to slide notes, and I've added my two pieces of text, and I've indicated I want them to be closed captioned. And I already have audio on this slide. So now when I go here, let me zoom out. I have my two closed captions, and I have these sliders. So I can say the first caption says, prior to departure, you may want to book the following, blah, blah, blah. So I would listen, I'm just going to pretend. I would say that, okay, that's where that one ends. So I want the first caption to show up here, the second caption to show up there. So that's a nice feature. Storyline has that now as well. You can do the exact same thing in Storyline. The interface looks a little bit different, but you can do this in both tools. So what's the difference then? Well, in Captivate, you also have the ability to change size and position. So here I can have it bottom center, I could have it top left, I could make it Times New Roman, I could make it bigger, smaller, black, white, whatever I want, I can format. Okay. Storyline, it is what it is. You cannot change the formatting of how it looks in any way. But the one thing that you can do, no, I don't want to save these changes. The one thing you can do in Storyline is, in addition to manually adding the captions, you can also import them. So I think this slide here has audio. So if I select the audio and go to options, I can add the captions using a dialog box very similar to what you saw, but I can also import them. What that means is if you'd rather not do it yourself manually, you can pay a company to do it. You can go to a company like 3Play Media, upload your stuff, they'll send you an industry standards caption file, and you would just take that, you would import it on a slide-by-slide basis, and there you go, and it's going to automatically set up your captions for you. So that's a nice feature that Captivate does not have. But in both cases, both tools do allow you to create an accessible course. That brings us to our next category, which is questions and quizzes. Both let you do the same basic question types: multiple choice with one right or multiple right, true, false, matching, drag and drop, fill in the blanks, survey questions. So more alike than similar in terms of question options. But let me share some things about what's better or worse. In general, Storyline is way better at the question level, but Captivate has more logic at the quiz level. So let me pull up a Storyline quiz question. Now this assumes that you're using the quiz engine, the official quiz template. For example, here I can't just add a button to a quiz slide. What if I want to launch a job aid or a document that they have to answer a question about? I can't just add a button. Now I can add a shape and turn it into a button so I can cheat and still make it happen, but there are limits. My feedback is limited to what can go in a single text box. And all those text boxes are stacked on top of each other. So I need to now go back and change my incorrect feedback. Where is it? Well, can I see them on my timeline? No, I can't. So what do I have to do? Where's my incorrect? There. Oh, look, there's my incorrect feedback. I can make my change. And I can only make it what can fit in that. So I've been using Captivate since 2003, and I feel like the quiz and the quiz question templates haven't changed. It feels very 2003. Storyline, however, on your quiz questions, the feedback, they're done on layers. I mentioned layers briefly on how it makes a click to reveal easier. Well, the same is true on question feedback. First of all, it's really easy to find what you need, and a layer is a slide on top of a slide. So here I have two text boxes and a button. What else do I want? Whatever I want. So if I want to insert a character here, she's happy and a little shocked that I got it right, I can put whatever I want. I could play a video. I could add some extra information. I can do a little reteaching. I could add some extra logic. So there's way more choices about what you can do. In Captivate, if I wanted really robust feedback, I'd probably want to put it on another slide and branch to that slide. So it would be more work, okay? So I like a lot of that about Storyline. But at the quiz level, Captivate does have some advantages. So here, let me put all of that back because that's a mess. Let's say I was doing a branching scenario that's a quiz. And there are 12 slides possible, but nobody's going to get all 12 presented to them because you're branching, so you only get certain questions. So let's say that if anybody goes through this, they would only ever be presented with 8 questions. Well, in Captivate, they have something called branch-aware scoring, so that if you were only presented with 8, you only get scored on 8. Whereas in Storyline, you'd be scored on 12, but 4 of them you didn't answer, so you'd get them wrong. You'd have to do some really fancy stuff to make that work. So that's a nice feature that can be really handy. The other thing is that it also does nice branching back to the content. Now, on either question type, so let's say your question is on slide 20, and if they get it wrong, you want them to go back to slide 7. You can do that easily. The challenge is once they're on 7, how do they get back to the quiz easily? Because the next button on 7 is going to take them to 8. Well, you can have a setting in Captivate where you put a special type of trigger on slide 7 so that it will go to slide 8 if you're just in the course. But if you had gone there from the quiz and you click the next button, it takes you back to the quiz. So it does a lot of that automatically for you. That's really handy. Another difference is how they communicate to the learning management system that you're finished, that you've earned completion. So for example, in Captivate, you can say, I want to base completion on the slides viewed, or I want to base completion on you passed a quiz, or I want to base it on both. Storyline doesn't let you do it on both. It's one or the other. However, a newer feature in Storyline that came out sometime late last year is that you can now create your own trigger. Oops, I didn't want to do that. One moment, let me just go to regular slide. You can now add a trigger that says complete course. And then you can set up whatever conditions you want. So if you want to say, A, you have to pass the test, B, you have to have visited slides 2, 18, and 43, and you had to answer X on this question. I mean, you can set up whatever you want. It's going to be work, but you can do it. In Captivate, you don't even have the option unless you go to JavaScript. Here it's a lot of work, but you at least have that option. So this could be really nice for gamification, because very often if you want to do advanced gamification, you don't want to be limited to the question wizard. And without that trigger, both Captivate and Storyline, you can only send to the LMS based on things made in their quiz wizard. So this lets you be a little bit more freeform. That's pretty handy. There's also some time-saving tools in each of them. So let me just go over a couple. A big point of preference for folks is just the interface and how it operates. So Captivate operates way more like other Adobe products, whereas Storyline operates way more like other Office products. So whichever one you're more comfortable with in general, you're probably going to be more comfortable with here, for better or for worse. Some people say, oh, well, Storyline is just PowerPoint on steroids, like it's a bad thing. Other people say, oh, Storyline is PowerPoint on steroids, like it's a good thing, meaning I can do so many things just naturally. Like I already know how to insert a picture because it's just like the tools I already know, and it does all this other cool stuff as well. So that's a common area of preference. Some other time-saving tools. Captivate has styles. So what are styles? Styles are pre-made sets of formatting for any number of things. So for example, buttons. I can have, this is what my standard button looks like, but I can make 5 of them. Like I want to have one button that's always for answering questions and a different type of button that's always for accessing more information. So I can set up these styles to already have that pre-formatted. Same thing with text boxes. I always want my headings to use this, but I always want my instructions to use this, but I always want my tips to use this. Storyline has a few options there. For example, I can take one button. So let's just say I have this button. It's hard to even tell that that's a button because it's got some other stuff on top of it. But I can take this one button and say, I want to make that my standard button. So I can say, I'm going to set this as my default button. Set as default button. Great. You only get one. In Captivate, you can make as many as you want. However, Storyline has Format Painter. Format Painter is awesome. Storyline has the Quick Access Toolbar, which is not unique to Storyline. It's an Office feature. And if you don't know about the Quick Access Toolbar, go Google it when you're done here. It will change your life. I love the Quick Access Toolbar. It's a great time saver. Captivate also has an iPad app that lets you draft content on your iPad and then import it into Captivate. That's one of those things that sounds really cool, and it's way more forward-thinking, but I don't need it. And, I've never used it. So that's why you have to decide what matters to you. And then the last thing we'll look at here is the pricing model, and there's a huge difference here. So if you go with the subscription approach, $300 a year for Captivate, $999 a year for Storyline. There's a huge difference. And a lot of people base their decisions solely on this, and I really recommend that you don't, because you're going to spend so much time in your tool. You really need to base it on what's going to make your life easier and what's going to give you the features you need. Because if you need to do something that's harder to do in Captivate, you're going to burn up so many hours of work that you're going to offset that cost in your labor in no time flat. Now, granted, maybe that labor comes from a different bucket of money, but a huge difference. Now, Storyline 360, you get updates more often. So usually at least once a quarter, you get a major tool. Like here, first quarter, we got the media library. So usually something pretty big. Captivate often has something about every 6 months if you're on the subscription, but not always. It's not guaranteed. And the other thing is that 360 includes a whole suite. You get Articulate Rise, you get Studio, you get a template library and a review tool. But Captivate also has a template library and a review tool. A lot of people don't even know about some of those. So it is a big factor, but I'd encourage you not to make it your driving force of your decision making. So those are the main areas where Storyline and Captivate are different. And it's so much about what's going to matter to you. I'm trying to get back to Storyline. It's all about what matters to you and what you're going to care about. So I encourage you to try both of them, and I'd encourage you to try and build the same content in both of them and just kind of get a sense of what's involved in each one so that you know what your day-to-day life is going to be. And yes, think about those extreme situations where you have that one course every year where you might do gamification, but also think about the Tuesday stuff and what you're going to be doing all day, every day to make sure that you have the right pick. So we've got a minute left before our official time is over, but I'm happy to answer any questions, including staying around a little bit late if anybody has any. The other thing that I'm going to do right now is I'm going to put in chat my email address. Feel free to reach out to me directly if you have any questions. And William, would you mind repasting the link to the handout in case anybody missed that? That gives a summary of everything we talked about. And we're also going to be distributing this recording and the handout out through our blog. So if you're not signed up for our blog, you can sign up for that, and that means that you'll definitely get that. And you'll also find out about the Storyline course once we have that. So thank you so much for coming, and if anyone wants to stay after for a few minutes for questions, I'm happy to hang out and chat. Otherwise, have a great day.